Abul Khair al-Aqta had a gangrene in his foot. The physicians declared that his foot must be amputated, but he would not allow this to be done. His disciples said, "Cut it off while he is praying, for he is then unconscious," or superconscious, you could say. The physicians acted on their advice, and when Abu Khair finished his prayers, he found that the amputation had taken place. It is difficult to see how anyone far advanced in fauna could be capable of keeping the religious law, a point which the Orthodox mystics lay great emphasis. Here the doctrine of saintship comes in. God takes care to preserve his elect from disobedience to his commands. We are told that Bayezid, Shibli, and other saints were continually in a state of rapture until the hour of prayer arrived. Then they returned to consciousness, and after performing their prayers, became enraptured again. Now, in the Sunni tradition, there's 33 ways to help with the experience of the prayer that I've found. The Shia have a bunch too, so you're supposed to be enraptured in the obligations of the faith, but that's secondary to reforming them. It's always good to do better and better, right? In theory, the ecstatic trance is involuntary, although certain conditions are recognized as being especially favorable to its occurrence. It comes to a man through vision of the majesty of God, and through revelation of the divine omnipotence to his heart. Such, for instance, was the case of Abu Hamza, who, while walking in the streets of Baghdad and meditating on the nearness of God, suddenly fell into an ecstasy and went on his way, neither seeing or hearing, until he recovered his senses and found himself in the desert. Trances of this kind sometimes lasted many weeks. It is recorded of Sahal ibn Abdullah that he used to remain in ecstasy 25 days at a time, eating no food, yet he would answer questions put to him by the doctors of theology, and even in winter his shirt would be damp with sweat. But the Sufis soon discovered that ecstasy might be induced artificially, not only by concentration of thought, recollection, vigor, and other innocent methods of auto-hypnosis, but also by music, singing, and dancing. And to come, anything from coffee to harder drugs. These are included in the term sama, which properly means nothing more than audition. That Muslimin are extraordinarily susceptible to the sweet influences of sound. Will not be doubted by anyone who remembers how, in the Arabian Nights, heroes and heroines alike swooned at the slightest provocation afforded by a singing girl touching her lute and twirling a few lines of passionate verse. The fiction is true to life. Well, a lot of people are moved by the Quran, whether they're devout or not, and then they go off and, some people even by the translation or the issues involved, but they're like, When Sufi writers discuss the analogous phenomenon of ecstasy, they commonly do so in a chapter entitled Concerning the Sama. Under this heading, Hujwiri, in the final chapter of his Kashif al-Mahjub, gives an excellent summary of his own and other Muslim theories, together with numerous anecdotes of persons who were thrown into ecstasy on hearing a verse of the Quran or a heavenly voice, hatif, or poetry, or music. Many are said to have died from the emotion thus aroused. I may add, by the way of explanation, that according to a well-known mystical belief, God has inspired every created thing to praise him in its own language, so that all the sounds in the universe form, as it were, one vast choral hymn by which he glorifies himself. Consequently, those whose hearts he is open and endowed with spiritual perception hear his voice everywhere, and ecstasy overcomes them as they listen to the rhythmic chant of the muezzin or the street cry of the saka shouldering his waterskin, or perchance to the noise of wind or the bleating of a sheep or the piping of a bird. Pythagoras and Plato are responsible for another theory to which the Sufi poets frequently allude, that music awakens in the soul a memory of celestial harmonies heard in a state of pre-existence before the soul was separated from God. Thus, Jalaluddin Rumi. The song of the spears in the revolution is what men sing with lute and voice, as we are all members of Adam, We have heard these melodies in paradise, though earth and water have cast their veil upon us. We retain faint reminiscences of these heavenly songs. But while we are thus shrouded by gross earthly veils, how can the tones of the dancing spears reach us? E.H. Winfield, abridged translation of the Masnavi, page 182. Should I share that one on the channel?